Out now. Hello.
Hello, Joe. Did you hear the news?
I heard all of it.
There's a new variant.
Yeah, actually, we have a graph of it. I put a graph together earlier on there. It's called the scary graph. The picture.
It's called new, isn't it?
There's there. That's all I need to know.
Oh, Jesus. Look at the skull and bones on that thing.
See how bad that is? I hope everybody's in the hills now, that you've already run for the hills and that you're in the hills, because that's...
So this is a graph based on a model of what it might do.
That's the model I put together, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I used your man Ferguson in the UK's. It was a replica of his models from last year. And
It's scarily similar,
I
actually.
I just put the data into a computer and that's what it spat out. That's what it produced.
Yeah.
I didn't put the skull and bones on it. It just put that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It was a computer did that.
Mm-hmm.
AI, I don't know, whatever. But I take it seriously because, you know, the science knows best. So,
There's something deeply archetypal about this graph.
yeah, for sure, yeah.
There's
a lot in it. There's a lot in it.
It's like seared into my brain after 2 years of this.
Mm-hmm. Scary graph. And there's a helpful description of what it is there. It's a scary graph, so just in case people
Yeah.
thought that
And
it was just a helpful graph.
It's scientific as well. On one axis we have COVID, on the other axis we have COVID.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's
It's
what
COVID
it's about.
squared.
Right, well, it's, yeah. It's, either way you look at it. And that's it.
Gosh. So that's the new variant covered. What else happened
Well,
in the news this
moving
week?
moving on from COVID. No, actually, well, you know, we have to address the naysayers and stuff. If you just throw up, which one is it now? MSN.
It was
No.
called new. It's not new, actually, isn't it?
MSN article.
Omicron.
Yeah, Omicron. It was meant to be. Well, it was meant to be new. New was next, and then Z or G or Z or whatever. But obviously, well, the official story is that new was like, well, you can't call it the new variant. People think you're talking about just a new variant.
Uh-huh.
That's not scary enough.
Yeah.
As evidence by my graph there that it should be scary. So bypass new and then go to Z. But G or G is actually it's not just the Chinese premier. Chinese president, who's called that. There's a lot of other people called G. It's quite a common name. So it would be kind of discriminatory towards all those people, associating them with a deadly, scary variant. So they had to move on to the next one, which was Omicron. Now, I hope nobody's called Omicron. There's probably a few people in the world called Omicron, but they'll just have to suck it up.
Omicron.
Omicron.
President of France, no? Omicron.
Omicron. Yeah, well, it's a bit close to that, actually. But as many people have pointed out, it's also... Omicron is an anagram for moronic. But that's just coincidental. Anyway, this article, the naysayers who would obviously try and push back against the graph that my models produced. This is the person who actually discovered it or first saw a sign of this particular variant, which are normal variants, are normal, happen all the time. She says that it's extremely mild.
Yeah, mild, but Jesus, that's scary because you never know what it might do. Right?
Could
Because I'm hearing a lot. I'm hearing that
kill you in a mild way.
The World Health Organization said it could be of concern. In quotes.
Well, it's of concern. Yeah, it's concerning. It should be concerning based on my model, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, people can make their own decisions. There's the doctor who actually discovered it. Says it's extremely mild. One of the symptoms, I think the only symptom is a headache. So it gives you a headache. But nevertheless, if you look at the Sputnik article, just before that, Fauci's weighed in, and I'm glad to say that Fauci agrees with me. At least he's speaking about it in more severe terms. May already be in the US, and it's going to spread all over, according to Saint Fauci. So I like to hear that kind of thing where people are encouraged to be afraid of a very mild variant that gives you a headache, because you never know what that could develop into. It could develop into quite a bad headache, and then you might die from a headache.
But
so,
if you get the vaccine,
and you'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
According to Pfizer, I think Moderna said they can produce a vaccine against Omicron in 100 days. So everybody line up,
for the Omicron shot.
Yeah, plan your Omicron shot now. But that'll be after getting your third booster for the Delta, because you never know, the Delta's hanging around
Yeah,
there as well.
that's still there too.
And then, just hang out, wait and see. There'll probably be another variant later down the line. So maybe just, leave some free time for another jab for that one. Probably sometime next year. Could even be before you get the Omicron variant booster or jab or the Fauci ouchie. You might there might be another variant that you can schedule in there. Anyway, I know people are eager and enthusiastic about getting these kind of boosters and as many as possible. So just, give them a bit of time. Give the pharma companies a bit of time to put it together. Well, they don't push too much. Don't any crowd crushes or panic buying or panic queuing up for shots. Just take it easy. There'll be enough for everybody.
Yeah.
Eventually. Detected in South Africa. Actually, that's not true.
Botswana, no?
Well, yeah, Botswana, South Africa. It's all Africa, right?
Yeah.
Just to be politically incorrect, it's all Africa. So pretty much, it was 6 or 7 countries are now restricted travel. You're not allowed to come to
in Europe and Australia.
Yeah, you're not allowed to come from those countries because that helps. You know what I mean? Helps business. Helps people and their livelihoods to restrict travel and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, helps help us recover from
the past 18 months.
The virus.
So you want to lock things down a little bit more, just to get back to normal. Let's do a bit more lockdown.
Yeah. They're shutting down non-essential business at 5 p.m. in the Netherlands. Stuff like that. It's to help businesses get back on their feet.
Yeah. Can be transmitted faster than other strains. Good. Also among young people. And could be resistant to vaccines. If you just throw up the talking about vaccines and this variant, throw up I think it's Botswana, no Bots W. This is from the Botswana government. You might have to zoom in there a little bit.
First sentence, right?
4 cases of new COVID-19 variant Omicron reported and recorded on Monday, 22nd November. No, it's the part where is the part? There, second
part.
The preliminary report revealed that all 4 had been fully vaccinated for COVID-19. So, brings up a few questions. Obviously, well, first of all, these people tested for a variant of which is normal. It's what all viruses do. It's what the flu virus does. It's no big deal. They tested for a variant of the original SARS-CoV-2, of which there have been several, and they tested positive for a new one. Did they have any symptoms? According to the mild symptoms report, probably didn't. Might have a bit of a headache. I don't know. Felt a bit,
COVID-y.
A bit subpar, but that's about it. So, and these people have been vaccinated. Does that mean that the vaccine doesn't work?
No. That means that the unvaccinated
Caused it.
And therefore the vaccinated need to pressure the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened.
Well, I'm having trouble following your logic there a little bit.
That's what they say. I'm just following the regulations and the advice.
Right. Well, anyway.
The health authorities.
The point being, these people in whom it was found first, all vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated. Although we're not sure what that means because that changes day to day. But
in South Africa or in Botswana, probably 2 jabs. Probably didn't get a booster yet. 2 jabs. And there's not a lot of people in Botswana who've been vaccinated. So it's interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's 6% for Africa as a whole, isn't it?
So it's interesting that the only 4 people that this was found in were vaccinated. Does that mean, that's something we should be concerned about? Not really. Does it mean that the vaccine doesn't work against this variant? Well, it depends. Did the people die? No, they didn't. They probably didn't have any symptoms whatsoever. Well, if they had any symptoms, they were going to be mild. If they didn't, all they did was find this variant in as a result of a test in these 4 people who had been vaccinated. So it doesn't really say anything about vaccines in terms of their efficacy against this variant, even though it's got a bunch of different mutations, 30 or something. Doesn't really make much difference. If you understand even the basics of epidemiology, it doesn't really matter for the most part, in most cases, that there's mutations on a virus, because it's still, your natural immunity or your vaccine-induced immunity is going to continue to work. What it does bring up is the question of whether or not these mutations were provoked by the fact that these people had been vaccinated, i.e., the vaccine challenged the virus got wise to the vaccine. It not got wise to it, but the vaccine, or so the virus responded to the challenge, the attempt from this highly specific vaccine to kind of wipe it out, and it mutated as a result of that. So it's just, for me, it's more evidence that the vaccines are actually causing mutations, and that's obviously something that has been part of standard epidemiology, virology for quite a long time, for decades, that vaccines, more often than not, are the thing that causes mutations in viruses rather than people's own immune systems in the way that they respond to them. There's different reasons for that. We'll not get into them, but that's the basic science on it. So yeah,
I could believe you, or I could believe the science.
well,
Here's my theory. I think it busted wide open, right?
yeah,
Africa has the lowest number of cases per capita by far. Africa has the lowest COVID deaths, officially, per capita by far. Africa has the lowest vaccination rate per capita by far. Ergo, because Africa is not vaccinated, the unvaxxed Africans caused this new strain.
you're struggling.
But that's what the official science says.
They found it in 4 vaccinated people, though.
Oh, yeah. Because they're surrounded by unvaxxed people.
Yeah, you think they would have found it in unvaccinated people as well?
Well, no,
that's
you see,
running rampant.
it's remember what they said in the summer. They spent a lot of time informing us of the science of this in the summer. They said that the unvaccinated are petri dishes for mutations of SARS-CoV-2. So the Delta variant came through the unvaxxed, and it's getting around the protection you would normally be afforded if you're vaccinated. So it's harming the vaccinated, but not because they were vaccinated, but because the unvaxxed remain unvaccinated.
Well, in the same, yeah, that's
Voila, that's the science.
that's what you've gleaned from the
That's what
messaging from the media and stuff. But they haven't said that. Have they said that specifically? They keep saying that the only real reference you have for that is
They're
Fauci
cagey
and the like.
about it, yeah.
Well, Fauci and the likes of him saying that this is a pandemic, and the media repeating it. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. They don't really explain any science behind how mutations or the continuation of the spread or the continued existence of this virus is due to people being unvaccinated. They don't explain why that happens or how that happens from a scientific point of view, because there is no explanation for it, because it's not true from a scientific point of view. There's no reason to think that unvaccinated people are the ones who are causing a virus to mutate compared to vaccinated people, especially when you see vaccinated people getting COVID, transmitting the virus, getting sick from the virus, dying from the virus. I'm not going to say as much, because the figures are very hard to get, as much as unvaccinated people, but they don't talk about those figures. Nobody's delving into those figures, and the only thing that we can really we've been able to glean from the actual figures is last week when we talked about that data from the Office of National Statistics showing that from April until September this year in the UK, all-cause mortality was deaths, basically, all-cause deaths, were twice as much in the vaccinated as in the unvaccinated.
You would agree, though, that based on the fears that remain, especially in the vaccinated, that the overwhelming implied message from on high is that
It's
this
implied.
is still going on because of those damn unvaccinated.
Of course,
Yeah.
and the reason they're implying it is because they can't be explicit about it, because if
Yeah.
they were explicit about it, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on from a science point of view, going back
Yeah.
decades. From an epidemiological or virology point of view, they wouldn't be able to make any case to that effect. So they just imply it. So it's all smearing, suggesting. That's been, it's nudges, right? It's all about behavioral science and getting people. This is all about getting people to do certain things and act in a certain way and live their lives in a certain way, and very little to do with public health. Just throw in here, just since we're on well, let's throw up age there, just as a reminder. Throw up the picture age. This is from, this is one of many, Stockholm University. This is from June 2020. It hasn't changed There's plenty of other sources that you can look at to get the same information. Look at all those nines. This is your chance of surviving COVID-19 by age and sex. 0 to 9 years old, pretty much zero risk. 10 to 19, very similar. Basically, when it's 99.999 or 99 even, or even 99.9, it's pretty much, for the average person, that means zero. Don't worry about it at all. And the problem is that all that we've experienced over the past 18 months, or since this was put out, which is, almost 18 months, has been everything that has been said by government and done by government and said by the media has flown in the face of this data. And this data is repeated across the board, So
what
there's
you're
no
saying
underlying
is-
justification for any of it, is my point.
That's your point. Okay, I can't say what I was going to say because you see, I just look at those numbers as a member of the public, right? Average public, and all I see is death. Because what you're telling me is there is a chance of dying from COVID.
So what you're saying is there's a chance. There's a chance. Yeah, I'm saying there is a chance.
I
Yeah.
don't know what maybe it's all the nines and people subconsciously are aware that 9 is associated with death. And they see 9.9999 and they're like,
But you just have to look at the heading of surviving COVID.
I don't know.
That's
Those
your,
nines
that's
though.
your, yeah, you don't like the nines. The nines are scary.
But this is, I know, I hear you, but like,
Well, let's go to
this isn't hidden. This isn't,
yeah.
this is reported. But it's reported next to headlines that convey foreboding.
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll go to the Telegraph article from a few days ago. Actually, from 2 days ago. No, the other one. So here's an example of a headline that you might think is scary, right? Excess winter deaths 27% higher in second wave than during last bad flu season. This is from the Telegraph 2 days ago. It's talking about the UK. ONS, Office of National Statistics Analysis, reveals that there were 63,000 excess winter deaths in 2021, in 2020 to 2021, over that winter period of whatever, 6 months or whatever it is, compared with 49,410 in the 2017 to 18 winter. That's pretty, 27%. Now, you got a number there. 2 and 7 make 9. Are you scared about that 9? 27% higher, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the actual figures that are right there. 63,000 died last winter, excess deaths, compared to roughly 50,000 a few years previously, 2017 and 18. That's a difference of 13,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. And it's 27% higher. Mm-hmm. Of course, people would ascribe a lot of that to COVID and all that kind of stuff. But those numbers have to be placed in the context of how many people die every year in the UK, which is, depending on the year, up to 600,000 every year in the UK. So you have a difference of 13,000 from 2017-18 to 2020-21 in winter deaths, but you put that in the overall yearly deaths over a year period, and you get, so the difference is 13,000. So you do the sums of 13,000 percentage. What percentage 13,000 is of 600,000? And it's about 2. So you had, in one given year, you had an overall 2% increase in overall deaths.
Than 2 years previously.
Than 2 years previously.
I thought that wasn't the case. This does seem like new data. I thought that actually, including 2021, there have been much worse years with flu in the UK.
There have been similar years with flu, and they're citing one there, which is 50,000 excess deaths. Now, in a population of 65 million, having 13,000 excess deaths, it's marginal.
I
right?
hear you. They're scrounging for, and they have found it, so to speak, assuming it's accurate. Let's give it to them. It is accurate. They're scrounging, but they end up getting to put in their headline the words deaths and 27% higher next to each other because it is, say, technically true, but without the context, which shows that it's a hair's
without the
difference.
calming down context. It's exactly the opposite of what they should be doing, which is putting in context and easing people's minds. That's not what they've done over the past 18 months or almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
They have excited and horrified and terrorized people's minds. But that 49,000 number in 2017, that itself was up much more than the 13,000 compared to this last winter, right? Mm-hmm. in the winter of 2017-18, deaths were about 50,000 excess deaths that winter. The previous winter, excess deaths were 20,000. So or not the previous winter, say, I think it was 2 years previous, 2015, you had, so between 2015 and 2017, you had a jump from 20,000 excess deaths in the winter of 2015 to almost 50,000 excess deaths. So it was an increase of 30,000 deaths, and no one batted an eyelid. But when there's an increase of 13,000 deaths, almost one third, or maybe a quarter of that number of the previous jump in deaths, only a quarter compared to 2015 to 2017. So 2015 to 2017, you had a difference of 30,000 excess deaths in the UK over the winter. 2017 to 2019, 2021, you had 13,000, and that's justifies a scary headline.
Right.
So again, that's context, right?
It's
Context
at
of
least twice the number.
What have we lived through in the past? What kind of excess deaths have we seen in the past number of years, over the past 10 years? Were there spikes in particular years which were more than the spike that they're citing in this article? Yes, there were.
Oh, yeah.
Did anybody freak out?
No. There was a huge one in France in the summer 2003.
Right.
Remember that heat wave?
Yeah.
20,000 excess deaths just among the elderly.
Yeah. Of course, in the context of this excess deaths, 62,000 excess winter deaths, 2020 to the winter of 2020 to 2021, you have to, from that that excess death number, you have to include, because that's over the pandemic lockdown year, you have to include the data that has come out that we talked about quite often, and it's from last year, where there were 20,000 excess deaths in care homes in April and May in 2020 that were not COVID related. So, no one has done all of the sums. You can imagine the amount of data you have to collect and do all the sums and come out to a figure. And the problem with all this data and statistics and stuff is that anybody can use it in any way they want. You know what I mean? So there's not much point in us really fighting about it or trying to fight against that, because people will use statistical data whatever way they want to prove whatever point, to make whatever point they want. And so there is scope for anybody to do that, but just as the government can do it and can kind of in that way fudge the numbers or put them in a certain context that doesn't give an accurate picture, other people can do that and put it in a different way that shows a different picture. Put it in context, then you get a different picture. But it's not the job of government, or it's not the goal of government, obviously, as we've seen over the past 18 months, it's not the agenda of government to calm things down, to dispel a crisis. No, a crisis is there to be exploited and to be encouraged so that you can do things that you didn't do previously or you weren't able to do previously. So there's also, just on the Omicron thing, if you go to the Substack, Alex Berenson, Substack.com. Alex Berenson on Twitter, he's not on Twitter anymore, he's on Substack. He just threw this out there.
Because he was booted off Twitter.
He was booted off Twitter, but he just collected a few articles that on the Omicron thing, and it makes a good point. This is, you can look up the article yourself. New York declares a healthcare state of emergency over a COVID variant that doesn't exist in the state, which is, exactly, if you scroll down from the HuffPost. New York declares state of emergency to hike hospital capacity ahead of Omicron variant. So to hike hospital capacity, it means to increase or to, in the expectation of some wave of illnesses, whatever. And they then, if you scroll down, there's another article from ABC. Long Island Hospital temporarily closing ER due to nursing staff shortages amid vaccine mandate. Now that gives it a different spin on the situation where New York State was, kind of going into battle stations with their hospitals. There's other articles talking about them cutting off certain surgeries and that kind of stuff, cancelling certain surgeries in order to prepare for, because of, well, they don't say because of staff shortages, because of
capacity for the coming wave
of Omicron. But then you look down and you see that actually the real problem seems to be nursing staff shortages, because they booted large numbers of nursing staff because they wouldn't get vaccinated.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of
Uh,
truth in media anymore.
Here's an example from across the pond in Ireland. I just sent it to you, Scotty. Irish Times. COVID crisis is like somebody flew planes into every hospital in the country.
Yeah, it's exactly like that.
It's 9/11 times, what's the population? 5 million.
Yeah. Severely hit, yeah.
And I won't get you to scroll down, but it's basically saying, yeah, indeed, it's similar to what's been reported elsewhere. Since the start of this flu season, the hospitals are creaking for real because there's a general increase in demand for hospital beds. And
Right.
only X percentage of them are genuinely COVID related, no?
Well, yes. Well, in France, as we mentioned, a report that came out about hospital activity in France in 2020, 2% of hospital admissions in 2020 in France were COVID related. And this was, as we said last week, I think, in the, you have to try and square that with the claims throughout last year, of hospitals being, as if planes had hit them, or hospitals almost literally collapsing from the weight. And then you find that 2% were actually from the weight of COVID patients. Then you find out that actually 2% were COVID patients. And the explanation for that, and the explanation that may still be going on, is that they have, to a large extent in many countries, kind of mothballed a lot of hospital services. So when you take a lot of staff away, and if you put out a lot of staff, take out a lot of staff because they're at home self-quarantining because they tested positive, or you're simply being very prudent and paring it down to only essential services. When you put in a small amount of patients, it's going to be quote unquote overwhelmed because you've reduced capacity in the hospital. Then the normal amount of patients that come in that really need to be treated, it feels like that guy said, like the hospital's been hit by a plane, right? It's a ridiculous analogy, but anyway, like it's overwhelmed. But it's not overwhelmed because of cases. It's overwhelmed because you have basically gutted your health care provision.
Let's look at the next tweet from an Irish senator or TD explaining Ireland's situation. How did it end up that it feels like there's planes flying into the hospitals? In 2001, Ireland had over 22,500 hospital beds. In 2021, 20 years later, we have 14,000 hospital beds. In that 20 years, our population grew by 1 million people, or 25%.
Right. So it's basically been
there is massive pressure on the health service because that's the two political parties. The government gutted it, and look at the time spent. I mean, this goes beyond COVID. This is like austerity. Remember all that? This didn't really affect Americans as much as it did in Europe. They went through a bunch of countries. Bankers, the European Commission, the what were they called? The trifecta. The triumvirate, I don't know. Anyway, because countries like Ireland defaulted basically on their debt because of 2008 global financial crisis, and they were told, this is what you're going to do. You're going to start to slash everything.
Healthcare. You're going to slash,
especially
destroy
healthcare,
your,
but not only.
destroy your, not only, but destroy. You're going to have to back off on funding for your national healthcare service. Depending on the country, these bankers came in and looked at where your spend was. If you had a lot of spend, like in the UK and Ireland and France, different places, if you had a lot of spend on national health service, they said, listen, you got to cut that back. This is I think
France cut back 60,000 hospital beds.
Right. As the population is increasing.
Yes.
And then it's not even that something like this comes along. There have been complaints about lack of availability of healthcare services in many European countries, like going back increasingly, obviously, as that guy just said, as they started to gut it since the early 2000s and increasingly reduced the number of beds, the number of services. So
while
it's
the
already been a problem
grows in the other direction.
Right. So in that case, it would have been reduced by half effectively. As the population grew, they reduced by less than half, the beds by less than half, but the population grew by 25%, meaning that's well over 50% reduction in availability of hospital beds and services, associated services, including personnel over that period of time. So it's been a problem that's ongoing and has been talked about repeatedly in the media. In case people forget, you can look back over the archives and see that there's many reports in the media about healthcare problems, excuse me, and healthcare crises, particularly in bad winters when there was significant circulation of respiratory viruses or whatever in hospitals were kind of a bit overwhelmed, but because they'd gutted them. So it's a bit disingenuous
So
to blame
it's not
that.
the COVID pandemic that did this.
No.
It's the government that
Not
did
at all.
this.
Not at all. That's the core kind of issue and the big lie at the heart of all of this is that there wouldn't be any. I mean, because apart from people's fear of dying, which is ridiculous because they've been told that by government and by behavioral scientists in order to, for government's own interests in keeping the population scared and controlled. Apart from the people's fear of the virus itself, it has been the core problem has, like we're saying, has been in terms of the panic around it or the problems. The problem has been lack of healthcare service as a result of government cuts. That's what's caused, the crisis essentially. You know what I mean? Because one of the core claims or one of the core scare tactics has been our health service is in crisis. It's collapsing under this COVID wave. No, it's not collapsing under this COVID wave. It's collapsing because you've collapsed it progressively over the past 20 years. If you make that case, then you can dismiss COVID completely because COVID would be managed just like any other respiratory virus. It wouldn't be an issue. The thing is, people don't understand to what extent this is a massive farce. It is. It is all built on a lie. The premise, the fundamental premise of all of this is based on a lie. And my problem is that I see people now, because we're so far into it. I see these people,
quibbling
over details that are way down the line, if you know what I mean, in the narrative, when they don't realize that they have to go back to square one and realize that their quibbling is completely irrelevant. They need to go back to square one and realize that all of it is based on a lie, and that people die all the time. And the people who have died from this particular virus are the same people who die every year from flu and other respiratory illnesses.
Viruses mutate all the time.
Viruses mutate all the time. It's completely normal. Even this idea that it came from Africa is ridiculous. It happens very often that viruses mutate in different places at the same time. So focusing on one geographic area is wrong, is false. It's just a spurious claim. But it justifies government to say, you know what, we're going to lock down no travel from to and from that country. So more population control. It's all, if you look at all of it, all of the, whether they intended or not, all of the policies around this so-called pandemic end up affecting the population in terms of controlling them through government policy.
And without any logical, without any matching or corresponding pattern to the claims that are made about the reason for doing it. So, for example, okay, it's March 2020. People start to panic. And the headlines are, there's a deadly pandemic underway. We need to lock things down. But air travel was open throughout. Now, they gave the impression, it was implied to a lot of people. They said, well, I'm not able to fly. It's physically impossible. That wasn't true. You could fly. Borders were open.
All the politicians were flying around.
In other words, their actions didn't correspond to what they were saying, which would be to shut the borders.
Of course, but they didn't shut the borders, really, at all. There was a few places you technically couldn't go to, one of them being New Zealand, the kind of zero COVID places. But for the rest, you could go. Of course, there were some restrictions, but if you had any sense, you could easily get around those restrictions with certain claims. I mean, one of them was if you're going anywhere for health reasons, doors were opened. No one was going to stop you flying anywhere you wanted for medical treatment. And all you had to do was get some kind of a letter from a doctor claiming that you're getting treatment in a certain country, and off you go. And that's what happened.
Speaking of zero COVID, China's, that's still its official policy. It's the last remaining country. The Australia and New Zealand quit that. Singapore quit it. Vietnam quit it. But China is still officially zero COVID, which means that they want no instances of the COVID. Isn't it bizarre how that's the official policy? And yet they did seem to be the first to return to normal life. Yeah. And their economy is growing. Maybe not as much as they had thought, but whatever. It's back in economic surplus mode overall. The reason we saw that is because we were looking at this Bloomberg article. Do we want to bring it up? About the supply chain.
God, he has it.
He has it. Okay. Bloomberg this week. Supply chain crisis only getting worse with China's 7-week port quarantine. And it refers there to its zero COVID.
China's increasingly extreme COVID zero policies are standing in the way of a full recovery for the shipping industry and prolonging a crisis that snarled ports and emptied shelves worldwide. That's obviously a spin. It may be the case that China is its zero COVID policies to whatever extent they're applying them and where they're applying them, that they are causing some snarling at ports. But as we've seen, as we've reported on in previous shows, that's not
The only thing going on.
it's not the only thing going on. And obviously, there's as much of that problem of supply chain issues is caused by COVID policies, ridiculous, hysterical, totalitarian COVID policies in Western countries. Notably, as we talked about previously, like I said,
Los Angeles port.
in Los Angeles, in California, they
40% of China stuff arrives there.
all
for
the
the
shipping
US.
containers are sitting offshore.
Yeah.
So where's the snarling of Chinese ports if all of the container ships are sitting off Los Angeles but can't come in, and why can't they come in? Because there's no drivers, there's no.
That's the primary reason they've given, yeah.
Right, but that was happening, and there were people actually reporting on it. There's
Okay,
and
that's
detailed
real.
reports of why that was actually happening, and it was to do with people leaving their jobs, a labour shortage, and a policy about empty containers, how many empty containers you could actually stack at a port, and all this kind of stuff. So it had nothing. The very fact that there are container ships sitting off the port says that it's not a supply problem at the actual supply end, at the originating supply end. It's not a problem of supply from Chinese ports. It's a problem of supply to the end user and the backlog or the bottleneck happening at American ports. So it's America's problem. America's doing something. Those ports in America are doing something that is not facilitating the movement of that product.
Yeah, there's definitely some politics involved, because we know that Governor DeSantis in Florida has encouraged shipping companies to reroute down through the Panama Canal, come up to here. We'll let you in.
Yeah.
So just in him doing that, he's highlighting the fact that there's politics involved, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Although there may be an actual snafu in the sense of not enough
Yeah.
people to actually drive the damn containers off the ports
Right.
and across the US. So,
Protests. A lot of protests are ongoing. It's like,
oh God, it's
and
huge.
it's almost
huge,
like the
Joe.
more
It's being reported in the mainstream a little.
a little, but it's
Australian media did this week. They had to. They were huge.
They're having to, yeah. But I mean, and like almost, well, maybe getting to dozens of countries. Certainly a dozen countries of note having major protests, particularly at the weekends, but also during the week, and not just in major cities, but also in smaller. Not just in capital cities, but in also other major cities. In France, just this weekend, obviously there were protests in Paris, as there have been yellow vest protests, and interestingly, reports about yellow vests protesters joining force with Antifa, like basically people carrying the Antifa flags, and them all marching together against government totalitarianism, basically around COVID. But that was also happening in other major cities in
In New York City.
Other major cities in France, though, as well, other than just Paris, But in New York City, Australia, Italy is ongoing, Slovenia, Belgium, Holland, the UK, Ireland. Just throw up the
Barcelona last night.
Yeah, Barcelona. Just throw up the Irish Central one. There's a good kind of quote in it, and it's just a picture of thousands of people on the streets yesterday, Saturday, yeah. And a speaker, Rachel Nifueline, told the rally that Irish society had descended into a dictatorship, a totalitarian dystopia, since the outbreak of the pandemic last year. And of course, the media reports thousands of anti-lockdown demonstrators. Maybe there were tens of thousands.
That's the first time I've seen the Irish media just acknowledge that that's what the claim of the protest is.
Yeah.
Because so far it's been like, yeah, hundreds of far-right protesters were mucking about yesterday. Move on.
Yeah.
But it was big enough now that they actually had to state
Yeah, and if you scroll down
what they want, what they're talking
a
about.
little bit, they're just she said that she was opposed to vaccine passports and added that discrimination against a new minority was now encouraged in Ireland. It has become intolerant. Hate speech towards unvaccinated people has become the norm and being is now rising exponentially, being coerced to take the vaccine. So what's interesting, because Ireland over the past 10 or 15 years has been all about anti-discrimination, like many other countries have been. It's all been about minority rights and not discriminating against minorities in the context of an influx of immigrants, and the government feeling that they had to put out this message repeatedly to people to not be racist or discriminatory against minorities. And yet this is precisely what the government does against the minority of people who have chosen not to be vaccinated because they don't need to be.
And at the head of the march, the banner was simply truth and civil rights.
Right.
Which puts you all the way back to, like, someone that gave a speech, he was a teacher, I saw a bit of it. He made reference to that man there you see at the end of the street. There's a great statue of Larkin.
Mm-hmm.
A Larkin speech in 1913 to massive crowds of people was about the Dublin lockout.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about workers' rights, trade unions,
yep.
and so on, so on. Lockouts, lockdowns.
Yep.
I mean, the similarity, the speakers
Crazy.
drew all these parallels, you know, and they're under the banner of, it's not Yellow Vest per se, it's just simply truth and civil rights. You can make it as broad as that, because that's where the rubber hits the road. I think it's dawning on people. You know, a lot of people get very excited now and they say, oh, there's a global awakening happening. I don't know how far we can go with that analogy, but when you see in New York that the police trade union is walking side by side, waving the US flag with the pink hair BLM types, something's going on.
Yeah. People are starting to figure it out, at least on the basics. If you go to the BBC, it's just a quick report from Australia. I know people know about Australia already and the shit show that's going on down there, but this woman deserves some props. She set fire to a quarantine hotel that she was being forced to stay in. And if you just go down to the third, just below it says there, the fourth paragraph, it came as Australia confirmed 2 cases of the new coronavirus variant, that being Omicron, which is prompting new restrictions. So 2 cases in the entire country of Australia of a new variant, which happens all the time with viruses, no big deal, never been seen as a big deal. And also that has been described as having extremely mild effects, and Australia decides to impose new restrictions. How can anybody not see the ridiculousness of that? Who are these people who support this? Can someone show them to me? Can you go and get one now? Pull someone off the street and I want to ask them, do they think that's reasonable, and do they not think they should take a stand against it, or what's their opinion on it? Because I'd love to hear from someone faced with that idea of like a country of like Australia or any other country who they're doing the same thing, of tens of millions of people, and 2 people were identified as testing positive for a new variant of a virus that is endemic in the population now and has been normalized, and this virus will, like all others, will mutate regularly, and that it's known that this particular mutation causes basically no symptoms, no different, but the government has decided to impose restrictions on society as a result of this. Can you give me the rational explanation for why that's? Give me the rationale for that. How it makes sense. How anybody should support it. Because apparently, I'm getting the impression that people do, that there's somebody who supports that. Yeah. Somebody thinks that's a good idea. That in any reality that makes any sense. I get that impression. Maybe I'm just getting that from the media, but I'm wondering if there is anybody out there who could say, yep, that's the way to go.
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably.
If the government says so.
The media's, it's social proof, you know. It's like, if you were to believe the media, then that is what most people think.
Yeah, the media tells people what to think, what they think, what other people think, and therefore what they should think.
Yeah. Where do you find them? Well, they're out there for sure. But
shouldn't they go back under a rock?
This is footage. I think we should play footage of, this is from Melbourne yesterday. The police acknowledged something like 200,000 organisers said 500,000 easily. That's just one city. There's a massive one in Sydney as well. Both this week and last week. Australia like never had these protests before. Look at the scale of that. And this isn't someone's drone. This must have been a media chopper.
That's
Down under state.
There's about most of the people in the state of Victoria, which Melbourne is the capital of, live in Melbourne, city of about 5+ million people. So that if it's 500,000, that's 10% of the population. So 10% of the population of 5 million. That, I mean, like we say, you
And
can multiply that by a lot
10
more
for supporters.
for people who support them. So
Which
it's
would
not
be
tenable anymore.
which would
really.
be the whole population.
Pretty much, yeah. The vast majority of the population think it's ridiculous.
Yeah. That might be, I mean, without real polling, we'll never know. But
Even if it's 200,000, it's still more than a quarter of the population.
yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah.
Australia. Have you been following what's happening in Guadeloupe?
Yeah, the Frenchies. Those natives in Guadeloupe don't take kindly to
It's insane.
To
I mean, it's like it's
rule from
it's
Paris.
yellow vest times something. It's more. It's even more intense than that. The French government. So Guadeloupe is a bit different to other former colonies. It is fully incorporated as an overseas territory of France.
It's part
right?
of France. It's a department of France.
There have been major riots for at least 2 weeks. A national strike, island department-wide strike. The French government last week sent in special police forces probably from its raid unit, and they've been conducting there's video footage taken from above in people's apartments, nighttime raids, shots fired, real shots, live rounds. People have set up roadblocks everywhere. I don't know what to show first. Maybe I'll show some footage of their protest. This is like the intensity of what's going on there. It's so intense that the French government has dangled a carrot. Paris has dangled a carrot this week, saying that they will consider discussions with leaders of the protest movement to grant autonomy to Guadeloupe. So they're like going, we don't just want the restrictions lifted. We want it all. Play the sound a bit.
Guadeloupe just for reference, Guadeloupe population is 400,000. Not a lot. So that's a lot of protesters for an island of 400,000 people. I'd say vast majority of them are the entire population is probably
Yeah.
unhappy.
Okay, so that's by day. At night, there are actual shootouts between, they don't say who, but gunmen are shooting at police and firefighters. So that's because the firefighters and police, to the extent that they're
You have that
involved on the side of Paris, are actively trying to dismantle massive roadblocks that they put up. There's footage online of them, basically communities getting together, sawing down trees so they form blockages on the road, setting dumpsters on fire. The special forces were shooting at people, and they were doing night raids, bashing through doors and stuff. And this was all filmed and put online. Especially, it's being followed by this account, Anonyme Citoyen, who's been keeping track of protests globally, not just in the Francosphere of the last couple of years. So let me just see make sure I get the claim right. Okay, so headline here: France to consider some autonomy for Caribbean island amid unrest. The history of this goes back beyond COVID. They're also reeling from austerity, as we talked about earlier, and there's always been a latent independence movement, well, it's been turbocharged by stricter, harsher, more punitive measures placed there than on the French mainland. So that's definitely fueling all this. There's no word on how many people have died in the riots slash police counter moves against the riots, but it's pretty ferocious, and it has to be for the government to say, okay, we'll talk autonomy.
Do you have video?
I do. Let me pull it up here. I can't remember what this shows. Maybe it's just some roadblocks and stuff, but this is from my own account on Twitter, Scotty. Yeah. There might be live rounds we hear, but it could also be the firing in smoke grenades into apartments. Get people,
that was
get
initially when
suspects out.
They put everything on lockdown at
the beginning of
the
this.
beginning of the protest. They kind of like imposed a lockdown, and they were going house to house or apartment to apartment. Yeah. Forces.
Okay.
Okay, so you basically see people rolling out roadblocks here and there, and then police coming in and trying to remove them. But it's that's going on. The night raids on specific addresses with heavily armed French, in quotes, special police.
Well, they shipped in police from France.
Yeah, they said 200, but it looked a lot more than that to me.
Yep.
Basically, armored personnel carriers smashing through roadblocks to conduct night patrols. It's full on over there, man. I don't know if that's like a foretaste or, like I said, it could be context specific because there's a kind of an independent movement going on here. But it is formally a department of France.
Yeah, just like
And
any
it's
other,
gone full dystopia, let's say.
One thing that occurred to me during the week, and I just decided to look it up because I noticed that over the past quite a while, actually, a few months, actually, that I haven't heard much about Spain. And looking at the COVID nonsense around Europe, Spain's been very quiet. There's been like
It dominated headlines in 2020.
Yeah, but
as the exemplary.
Yeah, but most of this year, nothing. I couldn't find anything. There was nothing popping up. So I look at it, and then I looked into it and wondered why it's so quiet there. And of course, I'm suspicious because whenever the media isn't reporting on, a certain country, particularly around COVID, it suggests that it's not going the way the media would like it to go, which is some kind of like serious crisis problem that they can catapult into the minds of people's brain or into people's brains. So if you just look at the first Telegraph article that you put up before, the reason is you put it up, Telegraph, before you had it up the first time. The reason that you're not hearing much about Spain is because, in particular, this is Isabel Díaz Ayuso, who is she's basically kind of like, I suppose, the governor, if you want an analogy, she's the governor of Madrid. Spain has 13 autonomous regions, kind of like states, and Madrid is one state. It's not the biggest, most populous, but not far off it. And she is the leader of the Madrid region, and she has taken a really adversarial stance towards lockdowns and stuff, as you can see from the headline there. She's called them an abuse of power, and then has to go with the left because she's from the kind of right-wing party. Has to go with the left, claiming that they have a paternalistic obsession with them.
Wait, are you sure you're getting that right? Because the subheading suggests that this woman, Ayuso, has defied Spain's overall government to free the city from restrictions, so that such that she is the one who's keeping them up.
Huh?
If you read the
No, she's defied Spain's government, and she has freed the city from restrictions.
right, okay,
So she's defied. Currently, the government is a left-wing socialist government, and she's on the right. She's the Partido Popular Party,
right,
which is
okay.
the Conservative Party. If you scroll down a little bit, so she's able to use her devolved powers to apply the loosest set of restrictions to business and leisure in Spain before abandoning all limits last month. And she says the economy is all quite sensibly says that the economy is also a health question. And she says, if you scroll down a little bit, Scotty, I'm reading it.
No, we can't see it.
We can't see anymore? You're not logged in. Okay. Playing off health and economy against each other is a lie because what happens to people who are ruined? What about their health and the people who commit suicide or suffer depression? She says, we have shown that lockdowns are not the answer. We have gone on the attack against the virus and not against businesses. And said that people need to take individual responsibility to fight the pandemic. And she's weathered unprecedented pressure after going against lockdown.
Right.
She says paternalistic left-wing governments think that citizens are better off locked up in their homes and living off subsidies. We have shown in Madrid that you can fight the virus without destroying people's personal hopes and dreams. Her fans call her Saint Isabel. She's idolized by restaurant owners. She says, one of whom has named his venue Freedom Cafe, while another sells a dish inspired by her politics. The recipe has a lot of eggs in honor of the huevos she showed in facing down the coalition government in Madrid, in the main government. But yeah, so I mean that's the reason, and of course, where kind of Madrid leads, other regions will kind of tend to follow. You know what I mean? So generally speaking, Spain is, after it's like you said, extreme lockdowns and stuff of 2020, it has pretty much just, it's kind of almost, I don't know if there's another country that you compare to, maybe not China or whatever in terms of its policy, but it's basically just gone meh.
So they're not doing the whole COVID pass thing.
No.
Interesting. So a little bit of
but you haven't heard a
balls
word
or
about
huevos in this case from within a country can
but you need the right person.
put the kibosh on.
You need someone like that to be able to take within in a position of enough power to be able to do that, who has a bit of sense. But the vast majority of them just fall in line with the overall hysteria and
It reminds me of
the flow, you know?
Governor DeSantis in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Similar.
You remember, well, we didn't mention it last week, but 2 weeks ago he had a ballsy stunt at a press conference in which he made a show, Trump style, of showing that he was signing 4 bills that would prevent any mandating of vaccines in the state of Florida.
Right.
Well, look at this latest headline. I think I sent it to you. This week, headline, Town Hall, Florida reports lowest daily COVID cases per capita in the country as lockdown states see rise in infections. He's totally vindicated.
Can we draw any conclusions from that? Is it possible to draw conclusions from that? Or you're not allowed to? Is it like, would it be hate speech to draw a conclusion from that?
The logical conclusion would be DeSantis for president, or is that?
Well, the logical conclusion is that lockdowns don't work. Lockdowns have the opposite impact that they claim it that they have, and taking the approach of people like DeSantis and this woman in Madrid is a way to do what they claim they've been wanting to do. Governments around the world, as in open back up and put this all behind us, but none of them are doing it. They're continuing with this. Obviously, this Omicron variant. They're doubling down, and I've said this repeatedly. They're not letting it go. There's most of the governments in the world, especially the major Western governments, are not letting it go. They could let it go. It could go back to normal. You could have your life back. It could all be a distant memory, but it's not. They're not going to allow that to happen because they're too high on the power and control trip that the claim of a deadly pandemic and the effect it has on the population gives them, which is to allow them to control the minutiae of people's lives and manipulate people and keep people in a state of fear. There's only one rational conclusion at this point, after 18 months going on for 2 years of looking at the overall picture. There's only one conclusion, and it's that all of this was concocted for the specific reason of tormenting, controlling, manipulating, and scaring the population, so that governments could get off on it, basically. Govern. So governments can govern better.
Virus going to virus, but on the other side, government's going to
govern you harder.
Govern me harder, Daddy.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Big Pharma's right in there as well with their money making scheme. They love the monies. There's a great article actually in the Jacobin, which is a good, well, for the most part, a good website. If you just throw it up there, Scotty, Jacobin Mag. Big Pharma's favorite Democrats saved the drug industry $500 billion. So, first paragraph. Big Pharma's massive lobbying campaign and advertising offensive against Democrats' drug pricing plan saved the industry nearly $500 billion. That represents a return of more than 1,700 times the investment the drug industry has made in lobbying Congress this year. That's a pretty good return, 1,700 times return. So basically, in the Build Back Better, Biden's Build Back Better bill, they had put in pricing caps or whatever that sound like they're good, but they actually were only going to save the country, the American taxpayer, $250 billion. But a few different House Democrats, a few different Democrats are in the third paragraph there. Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona, Scott Peters of California, and Kurt Schrader of Oregon all got together and negotiated different kind of price caps that would or that would save did I get that right? Yeah. Would save, sorry, I got that the wrong way around. It would save, the initial Build Back Better bill would save $700 billion for the taxpayer in drug prices. So we're taking that money away from pharma in terms of the prices they put on drugs.
Yeah.
These three got together and reduced that saving to the country, to the American taxpayer, down to $250 billion, thereby giving the difference, $450 billion, to pharma in terms of higher prices for drugs. I mean, you saw that price, the thing for the Merck drug against COVID. I think it was, coincidentally enough, it was $1,700. Was it $1,700? Anyway, it cost $17 to manufacture, but they were selling it at, I can't remember the number.
Merck's miraculous COVID drug.
Yeah, it was like 50 times the price or something like that, or 20 times the price.
Yeah, it's because it's a racket.
And the interesting thing is that
price gouging.
But the interesting thing is that the taxpayer funded the research that developed the drug. So the government, the American government, gave Merck the money to develop that drug. It cost them $17 to produce, that they are selling to the population, then charging the average person in America something like 170, maybe, is 10 times the price.
Yeah. Well, it's called social welfare.
So this is part of the same deal, right?
Overwhelmingly goes one way.
Right, but this is part of the same deal. That kind of price cap where they're allowed to increase the price by 10 times the cost, or allowed to make a 1,000% profit on their drugs. That's been facilitated by certain Democrat politicians who themselves are receiving shitloads of money, i.e. Millions of dollars in funds from pharmaceutical companies. And the way they give them money, quote unquote, is that it's bizarre. Like, I mean, there's other ways they obviously give money indirectly and that kind of stuff, but one way that they give it, the most prominent way they give it indirectly, that's at least kind of, it's above board, but it shouldn't be, which is that the pharma companies spend shitloads of money on advertising for that politicians, whatever campaign they're in, for the Senate or for Congress, for a return to Congress, whatever. They put in shitloads of money into the advertising, big upping them on billboards across the state and across the country. They'll throw tens of millions at that. And then that senator, obviously, or that person, whenever they get re-elected as a result of that advertising paid for by Big Pharma, then is able to propose, modify or change laws that mean that Big Pharma can charge ridiculous amounts of money and make massive profits on drugs that the American taxpayer has already paid for in the development of.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And you think there's no
awesome.
corruption in any of this? People think that all of it's on legitimate,
rank. It's
on the
rank
level,
corruption.
right down to COVID and how it plays out with COVID and the nexus between politicians and big pharma. That which I've just described. People then think that they're all on the level when they talk about COVID and what needs to be done and how bad COVID is and how dangerous COVID is and how many drugs we need for COVID and how people need to stay afraid about COVID and keep getting your boosters and keep getting your vaccines and keep taking the drugs that we keep manufacturing with your money for this virus. Why, again, I mean, it's appealing to reason here. I'm appealing to people's reason. I know there's not a lot of it out there, but...
No, and you might start with Jacobin, which, has
Yeah.
been pro-COVID agenda since the bloody beginning.
Right, yeah.
And anyone else is a right-wing death cult conspiracy theorist member who doesn't believe that this is the plague returned. Another criticism I have with Jacobin is that I bet, without having actually read the article, I confess they make zero mention of the fact that if Donald Trump were still in the White House, this would never have happened.
No,
He
of
would
course
never
not.
have let the so-called left Democrat politicians do that, because one of his main beefs and successes in his his only term, was that he took on price gouging in the United States and massively reduced the cost to the working classes for drugs.
Right, which was which was a big problem with Trump, right?
Massive problem, because the anecdote that we live in a biomedical security global complex globalist state is really apropos, because in the last 20 years, the left completely missed this, but we've gone from big weapons, big defense, big oil being by far at the time the biggest spenders of lobbying money in Washington DC to, by a factor of 2, they now dwarf them by a factor of 2, big pharma.
Big pharma, yeah. They're pulling the strings.
It's rank. It's like the rank corruption they pointed out on the left 20 years ago, but it's squared now, and it's so pervasive they can't see the freaking structure of it. Like it's like goldfish in a water in a goldfish bowl, going, what water?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're swimming in it.
Yeah.
It's off the scale.
For
Of course,
sure.
another voice who would be pointing it out if he was allowed to have any kind of mainstream access would be Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But he's, literally an enemy of the state, according to the Biden regime, and treated as such when it comes to media access anyway.
Yeah. In other news, just throw up that RT article, kind of connected, maybe, probably not, but coming to a headline near you very soon. The leader of the Taliban has delivered his first televised address since the group took power in Afghanistan in August. And it's a plea for help. He vowed not to interfere in other countries and asked for international aid. We assure all the countries that we will not interfere in their internal affairs. We want to have good economic relations with them. He said in his 30-minute speech that he's trying as much as possible to solve the problems of the people, which he blamed on the country's previous US-backed government, calling it the weakest in the world. And then the context of this is that Afghanistan is facing the prospect of a humanitarian disaster, with half of its 38 million people on the brink of starvation, according to UN estimates. Inflation out of control, food prices soared, and while once the US pulled out, they just dropped Afghanistan and its people, its 38 million people, in the toilet, basically. Foreign aid formerly accounted for up to 75% of the Afghan budget under the previous US dodgy administration. And
Which said leader took off with stuff in his airplane.
right.
Yeah.
And he also reiterated the call on Washington to unlock the 10 billion in Afghan funds it froze in response to the regime change in the country. So that when America left, it took $10 billion of Afghan money with it, and now the Afghan people are starving, and America's like, meh, you made the wrong choice. So that's how much they care about people. That's how much governments care about people. And yet, throughout the entire COVID bullshit pandemic, everybody has been working off the assumption that this was all being done, all the totalitarian restrictions were all being done on the basis of the government caring about the people. People have got a lot of waking up to do. And if they let it go any longer, it's not going to be pretty, because they're in, like we've said so many times before, they're in a very abusive relationship with the government, and they're denying it. And there's only so long you can deny that from before very bad things start to happen, So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Many, if not most people, well, we don't know. We were wondering about this earlier. Like, can the figures in these protests tell us anything? I'm not sure. Here's counter evidence. Today there was a referendum. So one of the few countries on earth that actually allows any kind of voting, any kind of say on all of this COVID stuff was Switzerland, because there was a referendum. I think the last I saw before, the counting is ongoing now, but by 2/3 to 1, the Swiss people, with a turnout of 3/4, voted to approve the government's COVID agenda,
right.
which includes, no access for the unvaxxed, or minimized, reduced access and privileges withheld for the unvaxxed, and so
Yep.
on. So, I mean, if that's genuinely what the Vox Populi is in some countries, Switzerland, a wealthy Western country, then fine.
People
That's
have
what
lost the plot, yeah.
Well, they've written their own doom,
Speaking of privileges, throw up boosters, the picture, JPEG boosters, Ireland. This is on a store, I think it's on a supermarket front.
That's what was in my head when I said that.
Supermarket
Yeah.
front in Ireland. Boosters. To protect our vulnerable community this winter, it is vital that we all play our part. Please come forward to receive your COVID-19 booster. Immunity status. Please note that failure to keep your vaccination up to date on an ongoing basis will result in your vaccine passport becoming void. Privileges will be granted to fully vaccinated people only. And then they've got six little syringe icons down below, and the first two ticked off. Have you got your third one yet? What about 4, 5, 6?
That's fucking creepy, because later on they're going to have the same poster, just with
Yeah.
a slight tweak,
We'll just
and
put a
3
little
or
tick beside
4
three.
will have to be with the check mark.
Yeah.
And if you don't have 3 or 4,
No privilege
you're an
for you.
anti-vaxxer.
And no
Get out.
privileges. Yeah,
That's on a supermarket. Are you sure? It's not like the airport or something.
maybe. I'm looking at the background there. Could be the airport or bus station or something weird like that. One of those weird places.
Yeah, Ireland's probably similar to Switzerland. And it's just like, well, we saw the big protest against it, but what's happened to?
And this is the put up bag
What's happened
lady.
to the country of rebels?
Yeah, well, there's still some, as we saw in the protests. This is from the US.
What is she doing?
Well, this is a policy in
What was done to her,
in a
rather?
hospital where any or in a care facility, I think, where the policy was that any care facility inmate or patient or person who was anytime they were moved out of the room to go anywhere else, they had to have this bag put over their head. And it's if you look at it, what does it actually say on the back?
Something like,
It's something about equipment.
don't put it over your head because it can suffocate you.
Well, it says suffocation risk, and it also says something equipment. So it's just some bag that they pulled off, like probably like a TV or something, or whatever, and they're using that as a quote unquote medical bag. So they just, if you leave your room in that care home, and it's possibly that this has happened across many care homes where people, when they leave their room, have to have a plastic bag shoved over their head. That's where we're at, and it should tell you something
one step
about.
away from just
It should tell you something about the state of human beings. I mean, this is a commentary on human beings and all ordinary human beings who do this, who take it this far and believe the hype and the nonsense, and that leads them to do inhumane things like this that are clearly inhumane, but they're doing them on the basis of it being for the person's own good. They're gonna save you to death, basically, right? That kind of leftish, so-called left-wing kind of
care
foundation that Jonathan Haidt talks about, when driven to these kind of extremes, well, literally you'll be saved to death, and the people doing it will be like none the wiser, effectively, There'll be no malice in what they're doing. They were like, I was just doing what I thought was the right thing to do because Dr. Fauci told me to do it. It's like, Jesus Christ, those people are dangerous. Anyway, and also other effects. Let's look at kids learning. This is a report from Brown University. COVID rules are blamed for 23% dive in young children's development. A disturbing study shows scores in 3 key cognitive tests slumped between 2018 and 2021, with face mask rules among possible culprits. Well, it was the only thing that actually changed. Yeah, so it was from Brown University. Face masks and other social distancing measures may in fact impede children's development.
No shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, so it's like the kind of stuff that was obvious to all sensible people now has to be proven by a long-term study that's only done after the damage has been done. I mean, it's like there's so many aspects of this whole past 18 months, 2 years where people went, that's wrong, that's stupid, that's bad, don't do it, it's wrong. Instinctively knew it just because they're normal human beings and they can identify idiocy and something that's dangerous right off the bat, right? Just as a normal function of being human. But that was overwritten by by government propaganda, and everybody's going to pay the price, or a lot of people are paying the price. There's also the whole football thing. I mean, I was heartened, if you can call it that, by a report during the week from RT. We're actually reporting on, if you open the football one, foot. Again, this is RT at least had put an article together, at least giving voice to the idea that this large number of footballers and other athletes who are collapsing and dropping down
is newsworthy.
Is newsworthy and should be reported on, and you should also, openly questioning whether or not the vaccines have something to do with it, given that the vaccines are the only variable that has changed in the past 6 to 8 months. But of course, then somebody pushes back against it, like some so-called leading cardiologist, saying that it's terrifying, but it's just a coincidence. Don't panic. Go and get your booster. We were talking about this earlier, and that whole thing of follow the science and believe the scientists. People don't understand that scientists are good. They're basically nerds, right? And they should be put in a room. And not all of them, but most of them should be put in a room and told to do the things that they like to do and want to do. And then when they have results, then they give those results to responsible, proper human beings, normal human beings. Because scientists, some of them anyway, especially the nerdy ones, like, they are not equipped to make the decisions or to comment on how the result of their research should be applied or how it might impact society, because those people tend to have a very materialistic, very mechanistic view of everything in life, depending on the science, the discipline, the area of science that they work in, and on human beings, especially if they're involved in human health. And they're not. They have there's a tendency. I'm not going to talk about all of them, obviously, but there's a tendency among them to have that attitude of being quite, sterile, and there not being a lot of milk of human kindness involved in their analyses of the human being,
which is why they went into hard science and not like
nursing or some other care-based career. So, but there's a load of them today over the past 18 months are given that role of communicating with the public about what to do based on the science that they have themselves collected, or other scientists like them have collected, and how this should apply to human beings. And supposedly, in doing so, they're meant to take into consideration the feelings of the population, or how this might impact people at an emotional level. And a lot of these people can't even spell the word emotions, right? They don't know what emotions are. They don't have any. Or not, okay, I'm being a bit extreme, but that's not their forte, let's say. So they should not be opining on that. Like I said, go into your little scientific room box and do your studies, and then give us the results, and then we will decide what to do with it, other people who are equipped. But again, the problem there is the people who are supposedly equipped to do that, like politicians, they're a bunch of scumbags as well. They have been pawnerized and corrupted up the wazoo as well, so they're not in a position to actually make proper, caring, compassionate decisions about what to do with this evidence as it pertains to the population as a whole. So we have no genuinely compassionate representation for the population in any positions of power today.
Well,
we have exactly the opposite.
A few outliers, like Madrid,
a few outliers here and there, and they're
Florida.
the ones who stand out and shine out basically among the pile of manure that is the rest of them. So, did I make myself clear?
Yeah, it's
Are you
super
getting
clear.
what I'm trying to say?
Super clear. How do I follow?
Tell me how you really feel.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Scotty?
No.
I agree.
I agree.
But And one last thing, Ottawa, Canada. We'll have to do an honourable mention for Canada. Ottawa.jpg. This is just a little thing that the Ottawa Public Health or something, or the government, basically the Ottawa regime, which of course is the capital of Canada. Public Health is investigating a person who tested positive for COVID-19. This is like what you have to understand about this missive or this circular that was put out widely in Canada to all departments is basically like an FBI most wanted poster, right? Ottawa Public Health is investigating a person who tested positive for COVID-19 who travelled from Trudeau International Airport. That's not that wanker Justin Trudeau. It's actually his father, who might have been as much of a wanker. I don't know. But anyway, who travelled from Trudeau International Airport in Montreal to Ottawa on November 24th, leaving the airport at approximately 8:30 p.m. using a private rideshare service, blah, 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 during the contagious period. As part of COVID-19 case management and contact tracing process, Ottawa Public Health follows up with close contacts of individuals who have tested positive for COVID-19. The male individual who picked up a single ride share passenger from Trudeau International Airport in Montreal for transport to Ottawa in a white car is advised that they were likely exposed to COVID-19 during the following period. And then they go, Tuesday, November 24th at approximately 8:30 p.m, arriving in Ottawa at approximately 10:30 p.m. If you picked up a passenger from Trudeau International Airport in Montreal to transport to the Ottawa area in the above noted time frame, you should monitor closely for symptoms of COVID-19 until December 8th and follow these instructions. You should immediately self-isolate and call Ottawa Public Health to speak with a public health nurse. So it's hard to figure out what's actually going on there, but this is a circular sent out to everybody who was in any way along this person's route, right? So all airport staff, all airline staff, all taxi staff, everything, and it's put out as widely as possible. And they're all meant to self-isolate and crap their pants. And the reason they should do so is because the focus of it is that one person in Montreal airport did a PCR test or something when he arrived, tested positive, and they were only able to identify one other person who was somehow in contact with him, and that person are tracking him going from Montreal to Ottawa. And then they're putting this out so that anybody, we can't follow it all the way down the line, so anybody who might have seen a single white male getting into a white car, then that guy was in close contact with someone in Montreal who tested positive at the airport with no symptoms, and you all need to lock yourselves down until the 8th of December.
Or call this number if you suspect anything.
Or if you suspect anybody.
Which could be anyone.
That's the level of mentality around, and I mean, in Canada, I know it's the same in a lot of other places, but particularly in Canada.
Australia, they send the media after them when they catch them.
Bizarre.
Do the perp walk of shame, you know?
It's absolutely bizarre. And for a virus that basically is only as dangerous, by and large, as the flu. How did we get here? It's madness. The world has descended into madness. I don't know how it keeps going. I really don't know how it keeps going.
It's amazing.
The level of insanity out there and how people are so divorced from reality and from reason, and yet it keeps taking over. Jordan Peterson all the time says he's always amazed at just civilization, modern civilization, how the lights stay on, all that kind of stuff. Well, holy shit, he hasn't seen anything. Like, I mean, how can people function with this level of
because
being so dissociated from
most
reason.
Human organization / civilization actually takes place organically. There have been studies that have shown, like for example, when Belgium had no government for almost 2 years because the political infighting, they couldn't put together a federal level government. Things just went on normally. In fact, they showed that the economy did better without a government.
Right. Yeah.
Without a formal government anyway.
Well, that's very true.
There's still people issuing orders, there's still, but you see, the vast majority of human interaction doesn't require the government. That's the big secret. That's the big bluff at the heart of all this. All of this is meant to say, you need us. But people are going to find out, hopefully in larger and larger numbers, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
Like when 9/11 happened, one of the most amazing, spontaneous things happens without any federal or local missives. People spontaneously self-organized, and they were going from one side of like Staten Island, New Jersey, and crossing over. and talking to people and getting them evacuated from Manhattan
Right.
Island. It was remarkable, and there were documentaries made about it after the fact, that it just spontaneously started happening.
Yeah.
People self-organize and self-govern. And it's only fear that keeps them, and the terror perpetuated by government, that keeps them in this bluff that they need us to keep safe and to keep functional. You don't.
But they may actually compromise people's ability to self-organize and get
Right.
on with
Eventually,
themselves
it's going
by
to
feeding
take
them
an
full
effect.
of
It's going to take effect, and it's going to start collapsing for real.
right
Because it's become so detrimental and toxic.
by destroying.
By and
their,
large, during normalish times, despite corruption, despite its insane government ideas, it still carries on.
Yeah.
The lights still turn on.
because
the
people have
garbage still
reason,
gets collected,
people,
etc.
people have their own reason and and rationality and common sense, and they just carry on and do what needs to be done. But by filling their heads full of lies and nonsense and destroying their ability to read reality correctly through pandering, promoting lies to them repeatedly for 18 months to 2 years, they're actually compromising people's ability to get on with life themselves, and to get on with things without government, basically. You know what I mean? Because people are so frazzled and so freaked out, and they're literally not reading reality correctly. Like, I mean, they're believing lies all the time, and believing lies totally distorts and distracts your ability to function correctly in reality, because you're accustoming yourself or acclimatizing yourself to
Yeah.
extreme subjectivity, and
Yeah.
it just becomes a habit in a certain sense.
Yeah. You will know when it'll collapse, so to speak, in stages. System here, an incident there, and eventually possibly a cascading effect, and then it'll be, who knows, a moment in time perhaps, or perhaps it'll remain local. It'll be one country or one region that just goes kaflooey with mass rioting, starvation, weather events, whatever form it takes. It may not be an all or nothing absolute point in time where the threshold is reached. It may be threshold specific depending on
different places.
the place. But that's when you'll know that common sense for real is no longer something like hyperbolic that skeptics like us would say there's no more common sense. No, there still is, because things are still functioning. Lights are still on. There's common sense that's, for now, is still critically correcting the myths of some government and going, okay, well, I'll implement that to some extent, but
Yeah.
I'm actually going to secretly not do A, B, and C, because
it's stupid.
then there's a nuclear meltdown of the plant and
Right,
everyone's dead. So
Yeah.
I won't actually do, but I'll go, yeah, I'm doing all the things you said. Okay,
Yeah.
but but that won't go on forever if you have consistent terrorizing pressure
Yeah,
from
yeah.
above. Eventually,
People will
the
walk
nuclear
away.
reactor does melt down.
Because somebody's walked away or whatever. They just
Yeah.
had enough, or they can't handle it.
Or they
anymore.
were fired because they didn't get jabbed.
Yeah.
Where was the guy who was supposed to be in charge of making sure that didn't happen? You fired him last week, sir. What? I did? Oh.
Well,
Well, it's COVID's fault.
that's the problem with COVID. Two last graphs sum up where we're at. Covidia. There's a good graphic of where we're at. COVID-19 public manipulation model. Slight reopen, moves to new variant, moves to
Something cases.
surging cases, moves to lockdowns and further restrictions, moves to vaccination or another booster, moves to slight reopen, moves to new variant, moves to surging cases, moves to lockdown and further restrictions, moves to
Yeah, it's good.
vaccination and
It's
another
good.
booster.
Hamster on a wheel. And now it's presenting a false choice to people. And I see it a lot. You get a lot of skeptics writing stuff like, okay, people, here we are on the hamster's wheel. We've got two options. We can keep following it, or we can rise up and fight. I mean, there's a third option. You can just step off the hamster wheel,
Right. Yeah, for sure.
dismantle it, work with other people like minds,
Yeah.
community-based. You don't have to follow or fight.
Hmm.
But the stress on people is that they want to relieve that stress,
Yeah,
right?
for sure, yeah.
And doing creative, proactive things that take work, well, they're not in a state of mind for that, for a lot of them.
And another super simple graph that really, is based on models that were modeling. It's just called graph.jpg. Models based on reality. Basically, it wasn't actually any numbers. It was just looking at reality and putting that data into a computer. And on the left, That was supposed to happen. More vaccination, less COVID. What's actually happening? More vaccination, more COVID. End of story. You could just present that as your argument. You know, here's where we're at.
Yeah.
Can we do something about this? Should we change something? Obviously, the thing that was supposed to happen isn't happening in a very clear and obvious way. So maybe we should do something different, or maybe we should just give the whole thing up.
Walk away.
Give it up as a bad idea.
Walk away. In your mind, at
Just say,
least.
you know, it was
still
fun.
have to pay Caesar his taxes and stuff, but in
Yeah.
your mind, walk away, renounce it.
It was fun while it lasted, but you know, let's just this. I'm getting bored of this COVID business. Let's just move on. No, there's nothing more exciting, more disastrous, more scary. It's like
Well-
your man Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer or whatever, chief scientific officer. You know that weird baldy guy looks like Gollum in the UK. He said that he was concerned with the Omicron thing. He was concerned about it, but he was also concerned that he would not be able to bring people with us if we were to implement new policies. And I said to him, you know, he probably didn't hear me, but I said to him, tell you what, Chris, you go on ahead to where you're going and we'll follow you down later, okay? Just carry on. You go where you think you need to go with this Omicron thing, you know? Do the restrictions, whatever, and we'll catch up.
We're right behind
Yeah,
you.
we'll be right behind you, for sure.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
trust that we're behind you.
Yeah. Well,
That's
that's
an
nice.
example of an egghead, a nerdy egghead scientist guy who just has no
Out
clue
of touch with, yeah.
what's going on, like, and doesn't know.
Well, they're out of touch, but the scary thing is
How to
they
relate to
are in
people.
touch with something.
Yeah.
Because they instinctively or consciously, who knows, it might depend on the person, know that to bring them along with us, we're going to have to jab them with a little terror,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So, we didn't. All we talk about these days is COVID. What's up with that?
Yeah, what's up with that?
Why are we only talking about COVID? Did we talk about anything else other than COVID this week?
Knock-on effects, the supply chain issue,
Yeah, whatever. That's still COVID, right?
and whether China's anything to do with it. No, well, we can't. I mean, it's all COVID. It's wall-to-wall COVID, isn't it?
What about Wakushka?
How do you pronounce it, Scotty?
Waukesha.
Waukesha. What about it?
Walk
I
it
mean,
off. That was happening. That was last Sunday.
yeah, well,
A little while
so-
after we finished the show last Sunday, it occurred.
Yeah.
And probably people have heard enough about it already.
Well, have they?
CNN said that an SUV ran into people. Must have been one of those, self-drive.
No, they said an
SUVs.
SUV ran into people, and first reports we're getting, and everyone in the media repeated this, was that he was fleeing a crime scene.
Right.
I.e., there was something going on, and that was what motivated him. Well, 3 days later, Waukesha police chief says, no, he wasn't fleeing a crime scene. Which leaves the elephant in the room, which the media wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, specifically his motive. They seriously try to cover this and say it was a tragic thing, you know, it's just a tragic accident, incident, suggesting that there was no motive, that this guy plowing through and killing, now it's been updated, 6 people. 5 elderly grannies and an 8-year-old girl were killed because there was a children's community Christmas parade held in Waukesha every year, injuring another 62 people. And, you know, it took online sleuthing from non-media or alternative media people to find out who it was. It was
And what his past form was.
what his past form
which
was.
was actually
Darryl Brooks was a long-time convicted felon with a 50-page rap sheet and was fleeing from something. Not fleeing, excuse me. He had just left something. He had just left being released from a Milwaukee jail. Actually, not on the day. It was several days before the attack.
But he had past form of
On
running over.
$1,000 bail.
Right.
And why was his bail so low? Because Wisconsin and other states, after George Floyd 2019,
Wanted to go easy on him
massively lowered the bail requirements,
for
petty crimes or something like that.
and black people in particular.
Specifically, yeah, it was affirmative action type stuff. And he got out on his bail and he plowed through a bunch of people.
And he had past form of running a person over as well with his car. He had a history of
I
at
didn't
least
know
once,
that specifically.
He had a history. I think it was girlfriend or something, or some love interest or something. He ran them over in a car. So with all of that, I mean,
He has like all the social media. People troll through that. He's like Black Lives Matter up the wazoo.
and the implication being that it was
We
in
should kill
response-
whiteys. Very much made death threats in general, not against specific people.
The implication being that it was in response to the Rittenhouse verdict.
Yes, of course. Waukesha is 60 kilometers as the crow flies, I think.
Right.
Like less than an hour's drive. He was pissed with the verdict, which had just come out before.
So anybody could have drawn, any reasonable person would have drawn that conclusion, but
Yeah, it was
CNN and
political.
other media basically tried to play it down. They didn't want to even go there because
They didn't just do that. In the last couple of days, Republican and Democrat senators for Wisconsin have come out and said this. Not only is the media not mentioning who was doing it, or only in passing, with the suggestion that he was just mentally unhinged and it's just one of those things, but politicians, local politicians, have come out with a joint statement warning, quote, against politicizing the Waukesha tragedy.
oh my God.
Here it is. Yahoo News. Wisconsin senators, a Democrat and a Republican, issued joint statement warning against politicizing the Waukesha tragedy.
Is that because it's politicized enough in and of itself? So don't do any more. It's obviously a political. Don't politicize it because it's already super political anyway, right? You think I'm being facetious, but like it's
Yeah.
like don't politicize. It's like we're not politicizing it. It's clearly a political act.
Yeah.
What do you mean
No,
don't politicize it?
but to fill in that and to say, well, it's clearly a political act, is they're suggesting to politicize
No,
it.
but that politicizing it suggests that I'm politicizing it when it's not political. It is political.
Yeah.
Clearly, by the details of the actual act, it was in response to the Rittenhouse trial. It was a deliberate attempt to kill and maim white people because as a result of the Rittenhouse
Yeah.
trial result, which it didn't even involve the death of black people, except it wasn't even a death. It was the whole protest that Rittenhouse was at were a result of a black cop or a cop shooting a black guy.
Yeah.
That caused the protest. That caused Rittenhouse to go down and kill two white guys who attacked him and then get away with self-defense, which was fair enough. So this guy then goes and kills a bunch of white people deliberately. So you put that in that whole string of that context and that whole sequence of events, it's clearly a political act. So how can anybody turn around and say, in and of itself, it's political?
Yeah.
So how can anybody accuse anybody of politicizing it?
Exactly. And now, cast your mind back to all the times a car has plowed through a group of people. London Bridge. Killed 2 people, maybe. Knocked down another 4. Headline news globally from here to Timbuktu. Islamist terror attack. We knew that right away. And we were going to paint it as such right away. It was just 2 people.
That's not political,
Here,
that's
8
religion.
people were killed.
That's religiousizing it. Same thing.
The politics
political
is
is religious.
in the treatment of one thing or another.
Yeah.
And it's pure politics. And people know because already
They'd hope so.
$2 million have been raised for victims' funds. I think a Green Bay Packers football player personally said, all the funerals, I'll pay for them. People know. Despite the wall of silence, at least at the national media and global media, because everyone should have heard about this. Cast your mind back to 2017. A person was killed in Charlottesville 2017. Again, everyone from here to Moscow knew all the details right away. And they were encouraged to think about it and talk about it and how racist America
White
becomes.
supremacists.
Charlottesville, one guy, the Wikipedia entry on him, a statement in fact, the Charlottesville car attack was a white supremacist terrorist attack perpetrated in August 2017 when James Alex Fields deliberately drove his car into a crowd of people in Charlottesville, killing 1 person and injuring 35.
So the guy who did the thing in Waukesha, what's his Wikipedia entry going to say about the?
Haven't looked, but it'll be like mental illness. Probably so far it's going to be motive unknown. Wait till
What's
the
the
trial.
opposite of white supremacist? Because clearly that's what he should be described as.
Well, is it that simple? Is he because he's partly black, not fully? I mean, he's got dreads and yeah, he's got darker skin.
We'll call him racist then.
Is he? Is it
A racist
is it
and a racist
racism?
car attack? Well, yeah, obviously. But of course, you could say that it's provoked by the white supremacy and the racism of white people that allowed Carl Rittenhouse to get off from shooting other white people, whatever. But it's
it's
racist.
reasonable to flip the script on them and say, therefore, ergo, this was a black supremacist getting revenge for his side, and then you have two equal sides. But
Right.
it's not that simple though, because his sympathies are shared by a lot of white anti-Trump, let's say, and resistance people.
But they're self-hating whiteys.
If you
There's a
want
term for everybody.
if you want to stick to the racial issue, but it's bigger than that. You get these immediate corporate media,
Right.
Democratic establishment corralling
So what-
around the issue.
yeah.
It's not to protect blacks. Nancy Pelosi doesn't give a shit about working class blacks.
Right.
She's gathering around, and the system is gathering around to protect not a black person per se, but a whole ideology that takes in the whole spectrum of everything.
So the whole racism thing is a canard in a certain sense. It's not.
It's part of it,
It's
but
not
it's not-
actually.
it's not the thing.
really the thing.
No.
But they want to use it as portray it as racism in America because it's easier to deal with in that way and easier to demonize one group over another, etc. But what is it then? I mean, it's obviously the issues are known in each specific situation. So people trying to safeguard their own. Well, it can be a host of different things, but they don't actually address those. They just label it with this oversimplified term racism, and it's easier to portray it in that way. And it also helps to divide the population against each other, because a lot of the things that people are actually, in the cases where events like that happen, I mean, in the Waukesha thing, the guy was obviously just a nutbag, right? And he should go to prison for the rest of his life because he just murdered 6 people. But in a lot of the other cases, there's a lot of other smaller issues, very local issues that are the problem that are shared by people of all colors, all stripes, right?
Yeah.
But you don't want to highlight that. The government and the media don't want to highlight that because that tends to unify. That would lead to maybe unification of people along common issues or common problems that they all share. So it's far better to pitch it as racism, because then you can secure a kind of divide and conquer type of situation.
Yeah.
So
and maintain the political fuel,
right?
That effectively, well, they say officially propelled the Democrats into power in
Right.
2020.
Racism.
Because it was that fuel. I mean, last week, another side note, a journalist from the New York Times had written a story about the Kenosha riots at the time in early September, say, for the New York Times. Submitted deadline, here it is, boss, to her editor. They shelved it and said, we're not going to publish this until after the election. She recently divulged this because she's now an independent. She quit in disgust at this. She's now an independent journalist, set up her own company or whatever, with some former ex-colleagues like, not Alex Berenson, but others who also left New York Times in disgust at the rank politicization of topics like this. She was just simply going to point out a contextual report during that madness, the polarization around it, to give some backstory to Kyle Rittenhouse. So she was going against the mainstream narrative by then was Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist who just likes to kill blacks, even though he didn't kill any blacks. You know what I mean? But the narrative was set. He was condemned in trial by media. She wanted to post something a bit more balanced. The people we killed were actually white. He was being chased. The situation, there were other armed people on the streets that day. It was mental in Kenosha. Here's a contextual story about what was happening that day. Her boss said, no, we're going to save this until after the election.
So we
Why?
can use it as leverage.
Because there's a greater victory. There's a greater good we're
this
after
can be
here.
used to demonize Trump if we can portray this guy as a racist out to kill black people. Yeah, that's how the media works, and that's why people should be extremely skeptical of everything.
It's not
here
just
in the
media, though.
I know. It's
All
coming
the
from
intelligentsia. No, the whole lot. Do you remember Jonathan Haidt's piece in The Atlantic after Charlottesville? Headline, Trump breaks a taboo and pays the price. I want to read out the first paragraph. This is how the American mind, the intelligence, the best of the best of
the
their
people.
intellects, wanted to frame the fact that one woman in that case was killed by one guy, and that his motive was political, white supremacy, etc. in Charlottesville.
In the car, yeah.
He says, taboo and sacredness are among the most important words needed to understand Charlottesville and its aftermath. Taboo refers to things that are forbidden for religious or supernatural reasons. All traditional societies have such prohibitions. But every society also makes some things sacred, rallying around a few deeply revered values, people, or places. which bind all members together and make them willing to sacrifice for the common good. The past week, Charlottesville, brought violent conflict over symbols and values held sacred and saw President Trump commit an act of sacrilege by violating one of our society's strongest taboos.
Which is what, killing people?
Namely that he didn't, remember what they said, he didn't
strong.
condemn the Unite the Right rally hard enough that prompted the BLM type Antifa counter protest that prompted supposedly James Field to go and run over a person. And Trump wasn't, condemning it hard enough. He wasn't, to use the term, politicized. He wasn't, come on, man, this is a political moment. Make it a historical moment. It's taboo what just happened here, Well,
what's the taboo? I don't understand what his point about the taboo is. What is the taboo? What taboo did he break? Did he breach?
Well, he went with the Jewish issue. He said the psychological logic of the Unite the Right rally was to bind white people together with shared hatred of Jews, African Americans, and others under a banner and narrative of racial victimhood and racial purity. The psychology of sacredness and its function in binding groups together is essential for understanding the method and motives of the marchers. It goes on. He's basically making an ideological connection between Trump not condemning the Unite the Right rally fast enough, because he did eventually. Jesus, they got him to say it 17 times. Someone did a study on that. But it wasn't quick enough or fast enough. But that's BS, because the point wasn't whether he did do it fast enough. The point was to ideologically connect a guy killing a woman with, well, shit. That's a consequence of us all living in Trump's America. This one person becomes a sacred death because Trump. You see what I'm getting at here? The extreme politicization.
Yeah.
And having no connection to reality, and the exposure of its lack of connection to the real world as experienced by most Americans of all colors and creeds is brought to bear by what just happened in Waukesha, and the media going, crickets. What? I didn't see anything. Taboos. No one made any lengthy missives about taboos in the Atlantic over the death of 5 grannies and an 8-year-old in Waukesha.
Yeah, there's no taboo broken there.
We'll just stay quiet.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wait till the investigation,
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much bullshit around. It's hard to take. It's hard to stomach. And I think we've shoveled through enough bullshit in the media in this show today. Hopefully we uncovered a few. Well, we uncovered distilled out a few gems of truth. Let's say during the show. Was there anything we need to report on or comment on in the comments, Scotty?
Not that I noticed.
Just general commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. The woman who was hit dead of a heart attack, not the blood trauma. Yeah, well, that's the state of the world we live in, and as you can understand, it's very complex. It takes a lot of thinking and a lot of perspicacity and non-identification with ideologies and a lot of the different ideologies that are pushed on people, and people are encouraged to identify with. You have to resist the urge to do that if you really want to see what's actually going on clearly, or as clearly as possible in the world. And that by definition means you kind of take a step back because you're not really involved directly and you don't take a side in that sense, at least not in the way it's framed. You know what I mean? You don't take sides the way that those sides are offered to you. You have to take a step back because really the whole thing probably isn't going anywhere good. It's all going to break down in one way or another at some point in the not too distant future. But you can rest assured that we'll be there to chart the decline. We won't be hiding the decline.
No.
Get that reference. We will chart the decline week on week and maybe more often depending on what happens. So, but yeah, we'll leave it there for this week and we'll be back next week. Thanks for commenting, for watching, for listening, whatever you're doing. Smash all the buttons because that's good to do. And we'll be back next week with another show. Until then, have a good one.
Thanks for listening, watching. Bye-bye.